In 2019, the Medical University of Berlin and the Museum of Anatomy and Embryology in Roelof, Amsterdam, solemnly transferred to New Zealand 120 mummified heads of Maori warriors, the indigenous people of the New Zealand islands. The demand for such collections was very high as commerce began to thrive, and captains of ships bound for the Pacific region started placing large orders. To cater to these captains, who primarily sailed to Australia, a large market was established in Sydney, Australia. A dedicated market square was allocated for the trade of heads, where human heads lay in baskets and were traded like potatoes. In the video, representatives of the American Smithsonian Institution are seen returning the heads to the New Zealanders. After 5 years of negotiations, the remains of 4 warriors were sent back to their homeland. This process began relatively recently, with active requests for their return starting around 20 to 30 years ago, as these are essentially the remains of ancestors. Imagine, it's like selling a corpse and displaying it in a museum. A truly uncivilized act. Many museums have been cooperative and returned these remains. Look at the Maori elders performing a ritual ceremony to honor the departure of 20 heads of their tribesmen back home. The footage was captured in France. Interestingly, the local Ministry of Culture had long resisted the export of these remains, which were part of the Natural History Museum's exhibition in Normandy. It's difficult to say how the Maori discovered this mummification technique, but its method and results surpass even those of the Egyptian pharaohs. After undergoing the Maori treatment, the severed heads had a very healthy and rosy complexion, especially on the cheeks. It was described that the heads looked much more alive and healthier than they did on the living person. Mokomokai. This is the name given to the mummified heads of fallen Maori warriors. During battles, their heads were severed and taken as trophies. In the 19th century, European colonizers exported around 600 of these heads as souvenirs, gifting them to their wives and children. Starting in the late 20th century, the New Zealand authorities launched a campaign to repatriate the mokomokai back to their homeland, and they did so discreetly, avoiding media attention. But why was this necessary? Was it to put a full stop to the history of colonialism? Or to return the remains of the deceased to the earth out of respect for their ancestors? Could it be that these dried heads possess mystical powers? Or perhaps they hold information whose revelation could threaten an entire nation? Let's consider a few theories. The Maori, the indigenous people of New Zealand, live today in small villages. There are around 600,000 of them on the islands, making up 15% of the total population. Modern-day Maori don't give the impression that they were the world's most ferocious cannibals just a few centuries ago. The Maori tribe has certain epigenetic peculiarities caused by their living in rather cramped conditions and constant conflicts. These people are indeed ready to defend themselves and attack. The Maori are not known for their cruelty and aggression. Europeans simply labeled them as such because they noticed in them such ancient human qualities as wild aggression and absolute ferocity. The same Europeans, 500 to 1,000 years before they discovered the Maori, were engaged in the same practices. The contradictory representations of the Maori are not the only mystery. It's unclear where they came from exactly. It's only known that the tribe arrived on the islands in the 13th century, when the rest of the world had long been inhabited. Could it be that these territories were deserted? There is no written evidence that these islands or this archipelago began to be inhabited by various peoples until the British researchers started uncovering burial sites, trying to determine when the Maori could have appeared. In the 10th century, the Polynesian navigator Kui stopped at the northern island of New Zealand. He named the land the country of the long white cloud. But something made the man flee. Probably upon returning home, he told his fellow countrymen about the reasons for his escape, and they were so shocked that for the next 300 years, no one approached the archipelago. Official history states that the Maori were the first to arrive. No one disputes this for various reasons. But there is a researcher in the libraries of New Zealand, at least there were, I held these books, who claims the opposite, that there were people who lived there before the Maori. Maori legends say that when the first settlers finally landed on the shore, the islands were already occupied by supernatural beings. They called themselves Maera. They had matted hair, large teeth with protruding fangs, long bony fingers with sharp claws capable of tearing a person apart. Naturally, for any Aborigines, these people were gods or such aliens who forced them to change their way of life. That's why the theme has been preserved that they were hostile to the civilization that existed before them. In the 17th century, European ships arrived in New Zealand. It was the expedition of the Dutch navigator Abel Tasman who gave the country the name it bears today. Zeeland is still one of the provinces of the Netherlands. At the moment of landing, they were met by Maori tribes, local tribes, who behaved quite aggressively toward the newcomers. During the skirmish, several members of the expedition were killed, and Tasman was forced to leave these lands. In 1769, the next expedition arrived at the islands of New Zealand, this time led by James Cook. It was this expedition that marked the beginning of the English colonization of the archipelago, and, as they thought, of the indigenous Maori population. Cook was able to show them the achievements of Western civilization, and these friendly relations were reinforced by certain magical rituals. He wanted to spread Christianity, of course, but he was also interested in their culture. I think he was intrigued by these magical practices that existed there. There is a theory that the aggressively minded Maori were actually the mythical Maera, dangerous killers with supernatural abilities. But what happened to the Polynesian settlers? How and why did one people replace another? The wild humanoid creatures of the Maera, spoken of in the legends of the New Zealand Aborigines, kept everyone out of their lands for 13 centuries. I think their power was some kind of psychotronic weapon. They could create a divine horror and, for example, at night, influence these Aborigines, forcing them to obey. But with the development of seafaring and more ships in the ocean, there were also more uninvited guests. There is a theory that the Maera monsters then retreated into the depths of the forests, effectively freeing the islands. After all, it was increasingly difficult to fight the newcomers. It was then that the Maori arrived, whom we today consider the indigenous inhabitants of the archipelago. To regain dominance over the islands of New Zealand, the Maera began to emerge from the forests occasionally and mingle with the Maori people. They stole women who bore hybrid offspring for them, half human, half monster creatures. Over time, the Maera managed to almost completely blend in with the now local population. The times brought a bloody wave of change across the North Island. This led to massive migration processes as hundreds of thousands of people began moving in different directions, resulting in a certain degree of intermixing. However, a part of the Maori managed to escape. They fled to Chatham Island, located 700 kilometers southeast of New Zealand. There, the Maori established a new tribe, calling themselves the Moriori. Interestingly, in the Polynesian language, the name Moriori translates to true or real. Perhaps the Maori wanted to preserve their true identity and pass on this knowledge to future generations. When it comes to the mainland, the rules are different compared to the islands. People go through similar stages when arriving on an island. They must establish themselves and carry out necessary tasks to survive. As a result, people unite. Moreover, the Moriori held an ideology that was completely opposite to that of the Maori. They had religious prohibitions against waging wars and a taboo on killing. Essentially, they were the world's first pacifists. The Moriori practiced agriculture, gathering, and fishing. It is quite a contrast to the reputation of the bloodthirsty and fierce people often associated with the indigenous inhabitants of New Zealand. We referred to the Moriori as the peaceful Maori. To some extent, this label may have been politically and philosophically motivated to diminish the pride and significance of the Maori people. In the 19th century, the so-called musket wars began on the islands. Europeans brought weapons to New Zealand, which the indigenous people acquired in exchange for provisions. They were amazed by the deadly power of these new technological advancements. Of course, possessing something their enemies lacked gave them a significant advantage. Indeed, those who first obtained these technological toys from the Europeans became formidable opponents. In 1814, a single musket was worth 150 baskets of potatoes or 8 pigs. By 1820, the price had increased to 200 baskets of potatoes or 15 pigs. In 1827, the prices dropped, with colonizers asking for 120 baskets of potatoes or 10 pigs for a musket. The northern tribes were the first to acquire muskets. These weapons provided a significant military advantage. Naturally, they began to wipe out other tribes, launching military expeditions and inflicting heavy damage on their enemies. The tribes fled in panic, understanding that acquiring muskets was a matter of life and death. It is surprising why the educated British would engage in trade with a backward tribe. It would only make sense if the civilized colonizers had an inkling about the supernatural abilities of those claiming to be Maori. These indigenous people are strengthened by their ancestral connections, as the unique magical energy created in New Zealand is being diluted. To maintain their cultural identity and develop on a different level, they must reinforce their ties with their ancestral world. Thus, the heads of their enemies are necessary as a point of support or connection. On November 19, 1835, the invasion of Chatham Island began. 500 warriors, calling themselves Maori, armed with muskets, clubs, and axes, landed on the shore. On December 5th, another 400 warriors arrived as reinforcements. The attacking forces raided Moriori villages, taking the locals into slavery and killing those who resisted. All this occurred with the support of British soldiers. It was more of a ritual act, where consuming specific body parts, or even the entire body of one's opponent, granted power, a practice common throughout the Pacific Ocean. Experts suggest that the weapons and fleet were merely a distraction, as the monsters in human form could have easily destroyed their enemies by tearing them apart like animals. However, they chose not to do so in the presence of the English. Between 900 and 1960, we witnessed 2 world wars and numerous local conflicts. Similarly, on a small island, events unfold much faster and more dynamically due to the limited territory, resources, and food. It all ended with one group killing the other. Within just a few days, the savages we know as Maori wiped out hundreds of Moriori. In 1933, the last pure-blooded representative of this peaceful tribe passed away. With him, the secret of their true origins was lost. It is believed that the last Moriori died on the Chatham Islands. However, this theory has been discredited. But why was all this done? The English needed to conquer the Maori, a proud and warlike people. They wanted to demonstrate that the English were, in essence, conquerors just like the Maori had been to the Moriori. In 1840, the English behaved strangely and illogically once again. They signed the Treaty of Waitangi with the Maori chiefs. According to the document, the Maori tribe ceded sovereignty over New Zealand to the colonizers in exchange for full rights and privileges as British subjects. Why would a powerful empire need to unite with savages and show them respect? Because they were not ordinary people, but the legendary and fierce Maera. In 2018, the New Zealand authorities declassified documents regarding an assassination attempt on Queen Elizabeth II, who is the reigning monarch of the country. On October 14, 1981, during the Queen's visit to the city of Dunedin, a 17-year-old named Christopher Lewis fired a shot at her. Fortunately, the sniper missed his target. Interestingly, immediately after the incident, there was an attempt to cover up the assassination attempt. Local residents were convinced that the sound of the gunshot was actually that of a firework. It is also astonishing that no charges were brought against the attacker, Christopher Lewis. He believed that English civilization had, in a way, severed the connection with their ancestral world, and he may have acted like a zombie, following orders from some higher power to carry out the attack. Lewis was deemed insane and was not even taken into custody. He was placed under supervision, and in 1986, 5 years after the attempt, the authorities feared he might try again. But fortunately, nothing happened. Coincidentally, in 2004, Queen Elizabeth II's cousin, Lady Davina Windsor, married a man named Harry Lewis. It is remarkable that not only does he share the same surname as the would-be assassin, but both men also have Maori blood flowing through their veins. We are living in an incredible time as global processes are shaping the birth of new ethnicities that will become dominant in certain regions within the next 100 to 200 years. Conspiracy theorists suggest that if there is a connection between the two Lewises, the only way to influence the upper echelons of power, aside from eliminating them, was to infiltrate the royal family. And so it happened. Officially, these individuals merely strive to secure a respectable place in global history. Today, all the necessary programs are in place, with the first steps taken in the early 20th century to create or revive the Maori ethnic group, which was once on the brink of extinction but is now thriving. This transition from stagnation to growth occurred within a very short time frame. However, certain measures had to be taken to make this possible. But why did the Maera, posing as Maori, strive for power so desperately? It is likely that they initiated the return of the severed and dried heads of the mokomokai. While I do not rule out the possibility that they are former British settlers who have adapted to their new surroundings, it is also possible that the growing self-awareness of the people and the desire to reclaim their ancestral roots play a role. There is also another theory as to the purpose of these actions. Some of the heads may belong to the Maori. If the scientific community were to conduct DNA analysis, they would discover that the genome of New Zealand's residents does not match that of their ancestors, indicating that they are not related. Today, the Maori have excluded British children from their education system, with their own Ministry of Education controlling the curriculum and preventing outside influences from imparting unnecessary or unwanted information to their children. If the truth were to be revealed, military anthropologists and researchers of ancient civilizations would flock to New Zealand, studying the half-human, half-monster creatures and potentially wiping them out. In 1769, James Cook's expedition landed in New Zealand, bringing not only firearms but also weapons to combat dark forces and Vatican specialists in exorcism to the natives. After Abel Tasman's ships returned from New Zealand, rumors spread across Europe about the bloodthirsty monsters from the archipelago, the Maori. Fighting witches, magic, and witchcraft was as natural then as having internet access is now. The expeditions gathered information about these magical cults and practices and showed an interest in these methods of influence. The British government, fearing that the cannibalistic savages might become uncontrollable, decided to perform a Vatican ritual called Dogma of Identialis on the Maori. This ritual ensured that the Maori would only attack those indicated by their superiors, thus securing the crown's safety. This is a global technology for managing large populations. It implies that regardless of who is in power, this nation or country can be guided in the desired direction and given the desired vector using various technologies. Whether the Maori, the British, or someone else is in power, you can ensure that the country does what you want. In 1940, the 28th Battalion of the 2nd New Zealand Division, the Maori Battalion, appeared in the British Army. Surprisingly, over the years of World War II, it earned the most awards among British troops, participating in the Greek and Cretan operations and the Italian and North African campaigns. In just 2 to 3 minutes, the Maori can mentally, physically, and spiritually transform a person into a future soldier, fearless and devoid of fear. It is incredible how quickly this happens. The Maori beat themselves and recite certain phrases, chanting death, death, death to you, and life to me. We consider them powerful, strong, and aggressive, but they are not at war with anyone. They are not currently at war. They use their aggression, drawings, intimidating dances, and surroundings as a survival strategy to attract tourists. Times have changed and their aggression is now expressed differently. In the fall of 2019, scientists from the University of Otago in New Zealand published a list of countries where one could survive an apocalypse, and New Zealand was among the top 3. In 2001, British ecologist David Mayer de Rothschild, a member of the wealthy and influential Rothschild family, bought a 1,100-acre plot of land in New Zealand and built a farm for producing organic honey. For some reason, New Zealand has become a haven, like Kithoy Gayland. We are far from all the economic, social, and political storms. New Zealand has been very stable for over a century. Here, in the midst of a raging ocean, we find ourselves like calm islands. This attracts wealthy people who want to preserve their capital and settle their families in a safe place. Peter Thiel, a legend of Silicon Valley, a permanent member of the Bilderberg Club and co-founder of the world's largest online payment system, bought a 193-hectare estate in New Zealand. No one intends to turn New Zealand into a mundane republic. Instead, it should be under control. Control can be achieved by bringing to power a people who can be controlled in some way. If a global catastrophe were to occur, why wouldn't New Zealand be affected? Would missiles or toxic substances not reach it? Perhaps the rich are buying land there to be closer to the mokomokai storage site, which the New Zealand government is returning to its homeland. The elite knows that dried heads give their owners life energy, longevity, and power, as they did for the widow of James Cook and Queen Elizabeth II. Through them, one can make contact with a soul that has departed for other dimensions, like looking into a crystal ball. Similarly, ancient Romans made cups from the skulls of their fallen enemies on the battlefield, and during feasts, they drank wine from them, absorbing the spirit of the Roman warrior. This analogy is evident. Recently, a wave of gruesome and mysterious sheep murders swept across New Zealand. In June 2017, employees of a private golf club discovered the remains of 7 sheep on their field. The animals were disemboweled, and the grass around them was red with blood. In 2017, New Zealand police recorded several cases of brutal animal killings, but the disemboweler was never caught, and there were no suspects. According to one version, the elite who came to New Zealand from all over the world freed the Maori from the Vatican spell, and they are responsible for these crimes. The Maori also have a magical act in their blood, the desire to separate themselves from their identity and the proposals of the new settlers. The English Queen used these islands as a place to send criminals and prisoners. In this sense, the Maori ethnic group began to develop. For each freed Maori, politicians and businessmen received a mokomokai, along with all the powers that the mummified artifact brings: longevity. The rest of humanity received a freed, bloodthirsty tribe thirsting for revenge for their ancestors' suffering. Another version suggests that the mokomokai is not a magical instrument at all. However, this does not mean that it lacks significance. Each dried head is covered with a unique tattoo. There are no two alike. What stories might these ancient tattoos tell? Take a look at these photographs taken in the 19th century. They capture close-up images of the tattooed faces of Maori tribe members. These tattoos are called tamoko and are applied using a particularly painful method. They are carved with a special chisel rather than being pricked with a needle. Tattoos originated across the local islands of Polynesia and held immense importance in the past. Essentially, they served to identify an individual's personality. Primarily, these were men. By showing others who saw the person, because it was specifically about the face, it revealed their social status and personal characteristics. For instance, how strong a warrior they were, or how knowledgeable. It was believed that tamoko indicated a unity between the Maori and their gods, bestowing them with physical strength. The indigenous people thought that if someone could endure such a painful procedure, they were worthy of joining the tribe's elite circle and becoming a warrior. First, the skin was cut, then the tissue beneath was sliced, reaching almost to the bone. Natural pigment with resins was applied and cut into the third small incisor. The wound was then closed and allowed to heal. If the pigment did not take well, they would cut again and again. So if you look at old paintings of chiefs, their faces are often covered in scars. You can imagine that not everyone could withstand such tattoos. There is a theory, though, that the tattooing process was part of a Maori initiation ritual, where they became guardians of secret knowledge that they would not reveal even under the worst torture. Tamoko was first described in the late 18th century by Europeans. They said that out of 100 Maori, it was impossible to find 2 with identical skin patterns. And yet the designs and symbols of tamoko always represented reality, the world that the tribe members saw every day, such as animals and plants. There were no fantastical motifs in the tattoos. By looking at a person's face, you could scan and know if they belonged to the chief's clan, if they were a farmer, a fisherman, or had other roles. Their achievements, the number of wives they had, and their ancestors were all represented on their faces. The most common tamoko pattern is the koru spiral. Take a look. This is what it looks like. The koru symbolizes an unopened fern frond. During the age of the dinosaurs, ferns were immense and gigantic. In this sense, they accumulate a sacred earthly power. This sacred power, manifested in these ferns, can be absorbed by humans. However, the fern frond does not fit into the overall concept of Maori tattoos. As we know, ferns do not flower. It seems that by depicting them, the Maori wanted to mislead with their tattoos. Or did they? According to ancient myths, whoever could obtain the fern flower would gain the gift of clairvoyance. They would be able to understand the language of animals, find treasures, become invisible, and take on any form. Most importantly, they would gain the power to control beings from other, finer worlds. Ferns flower only once a year. In pagan tradition, this occurs on the night of Ivan Kupala, the eve of July 24th. The third eye zone opens. This third eye zone is precisely the theme of transitioning to another dimension, including the ability to see hidden knowledge and other such things. In other words, the physical world no longer greatly influences the senses as it operates on a different wavelength. Is it a coincidence? But the fern is considered the unofficial and most recognizable symbol of New Zealand. Sports teams and commercial organizations place it on their emblems and logos. The fern is featured on the country's coat of arms. Moreover, every New Zealander carries an image of fern leaves with them, as they are even present on the cover of their passports. In 2015, New Zealand's Prime Minister John Key proposed changing the national flag. Instead of the old one, which reminded of the country's colonial past, he suggested a design featuring a fern frond. However, 56% of citizens voted against it. A unique species of fern grows in New Zealand. It can only be found on the islands of the archipelago. It is called the silver fern and can reach an incredible height of 20 meters. When the Maori settled the island, they slept on the soft, furry leaves of the fern, and its poisonous fiber was used to treat spearheads. The silver fern made it possible for humans to settle this land. There was no need to conquer this vast territory. They could not orient themselves, and they often got lost in the dense forests. The idea came to them to use the silver fern, turning the leaf silver side up. This fern is endemic to New Zealand and does not exist anywhere else in the world. By using the arrow-shaped leaf, they effectively paved their way. The koru symbol in Maori tattoos was used in a similar way to how the silver fern once served as a guiding thread. There is a theory that New Zealand is the unique land where ferns flower once a year. The ancient Maori knew this, and the map to find the flowering location was encrypted in the tattoos on the faces of the bravest warriors. But to do this, all the tattooed heads must be collected, and whoever does this first will become the owner of secret knowledge and superpowers. If all these Maori, who were in a way, are magicians and preserved magical traditions, are brought together, of course, not only the ancestral channel will be strengthened, but the magical channel may also be enhanced. There may be some treasures revealed or knowledge acquired. These are very real things. It is not excluded that it was precisely in pursuit of the fern flower that the world elite began to flock to New Zealand and buy territories. After all, when the mokomokai, which the New Zealand government is so actively returning, are gathered in one place and assembled into a map, who knows whose land the flower will be on? The flowering of the fern is most likely an intensification of its astral luminosity. And at night, yes, it begins to prospector. It is only for 1 or 2 days. So as biologists say, it does not flower on its own, but reproduces through spores. But this release of energy is apparently felt by people with extrasensory abilities. Possessing the fern flower holds not only blessings, but also dangers. If the person who obtains it decides not to stop at treasures alone, but dares to open the door to another world. Since it is not entirely clear where the first Maori came from when they arrived in New Zealand, we cannot rule out the possibility that they came from another world. And their tattoos, the encrypted map message, are actually a message for future generations of Maori, so that they can one day return home. Again, speaking of fern flowers in this transition zone, at this time there can be transitions from the world of the living to the world of the dead. If a person has mastered the energy of other dimensions, they could physically travel through time and move either into the future or the past. They disappear from this world but appear in another. Who knows what creatures inhabit that other world? They could infiltrate the earth and wish to stay here, just as the Maori once did. Then probably the Third World War will begin, where humans will not fight artificial intelligence or each other, but with monsters from myths and legends. What do you think about it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinion is very important to me. Don't forget to give me a like if you liked it and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new episodes. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.